This is the Detroit Sports Podcast Network.
One of our fine partners at the Detroit Sports Podcast Network is The Athletic. Premium coverage for passionate Detroit sports fans. Listeners of this very episode of Two Bad Hombres can get 20% off. Yes, 20% off the first year of an annual subscription by visiting theathletic.com/DSP.
I was trying to get it how I live. I want them dead presidents. I want to pull up, head spin, get it, get fly. I got 6 jobs, I don't get tired. I don't get tired. I don't get tired. Get it.
And we are still not tired here on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. I am your host, Vito Geronimo Churco, as I like to say. Might be a little bit weird to my guests here this week, but doing this podcast, too, by the way, remotely from Southfield Public Library without the handiness or the expertise of John Charles Mackerer, my co-host and sidekicking partner in crime, usually, as I have Joey Yashinsky in here of Deadline Detroit. Also, Isaiah Hull, formerly of 24/7 Sports. Isaiah knows everything about U of M, and Joey, I don't know how he knows some of this stuff, but they're both in here this week. Joey, first with you. How are you doing, by the way?
Doing good. Happy to be here, Vito.
Great to have you along for the ride. And Isaiah, how are you doing, by the way?
Doing well. Really wish Michigan would choose to be more of the state it's supposed to be. It's April. Shouldn't be having snow falling, but we do. Unfortunately, I think we all should probably consider a move to Southern California or Florida or something here.
A move to somewhere down south, out west. I mean, we could use it, the sunshine and the rays and all that. And, I mean, it's just not great. It's not great dealing with all this. But anyways, we can talk about a little bit here to start off. Morning sports TV. And Get Up, this new show on ESPN, just made its debut, has been struggling in ratings, though, thus far. Now, wanted to ask both of you guys are sports aficionados and nuts, and, I mean, what makes a good, morning sports TV show for you? And first with you then, Joe.
I mean, I think, to be honest, the show that people want most in the morning from a sports show is just kind of Sports Center. I don't know if it goes much beyond that. If you went to sleep at 9:30 the night before, there's a lot you missed, highlights, results, all that. And I think that's kind of what sports fans crave. I'm not sure they're too much into the talk show format that you might see on, like, The View or,
I love The View, Juice. Don't knock The View. Come on, man.
Regis and Kathy Lee or whatever it's called now.
What it used to be, right? Now it's, Ryan Seacrest
so
on there. But
that's kind of what I think fans are looking for. So maybe if this show is struggling a little bit, it maybe speaks to that they're just more into, a traditional sports program with highlights and analysis, and anything that strays too far from that, I don't know if there's a huge calling for it. I don't know.
Well, I think also, Isaiah, and I don't know if you can comment on this a lot, but you see a lot of these debate shows, and it's Embrace Debate, First Take, Stephen A., Max Kellerman, Undisputed. You have Skip Bayless and Shannon Sharp, and there's a market for it. There's an audience for it, but I don't know how extensive it is, especially when you're waking up in the morning at like 7 in the morning, which, Get Up, it starts at that time on ESPN, Isaiah.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with everything that Joey said in that light. Personally, when I'm looking for a sports show in the morning, if I am at all, usually I kind of don't turn on my TV to something I'm going to pay attention to until later in the day. But, you really want to see what's going on the day before. Now, that's not a knock on guys like Stephen A. or Max Kellerman, who I like both of them quite greatly, considering what they bring to the table, but more so in a Sports Center setting. When I know IMAX was a little bit not that, but there's a time and a place for your around the horn style thing. I don't know why ESPN particularly got away from all of that. For me, it's like, all right, either go towards showing the highlights or go full Colin Cowherd and just have one person opining. You don't need the controversy, because the controversy ends up looking contrived because it is contrived. So why there's really no incentive to tune into a lot of the things that you see in morning sports shows between, First Take or Undisputed or any of those things, because that they're going to get in arguments, but at the same time, I don't know that they're really that genuine.
Well, no, they seem like it's scripted, right? And then they're called carnival barkers. Like, they have hot takes. They're hot take extraordinaires. And do they really even mean it, right? Are they authentic? And it comes off as not being authentic too, Isaiah.
Oh, absolutely not. That's I think where I couldn't speak exactly to what ESPN's ratings are. I don't really know that, but it does seem like I can tell you this. I don't watch ESPN nearly as much as I used to. ESPN used to be on all of the time, and now I almost never have it on. And I find myself watching like CBS Sports HQ a lot more often because it is basically what ESPN used to be. A bunch of highlights, having a guy talk, kind of explain what's going, the context of everything. That's really, to me, all I really want to see from a sports network. I don't understand why they, much like MTV, decided to get away from music.
What it was known for, the station, actually, right?
Exactly. Like, you get away, ESPN's gotten far away from sports and gotten way more into all this periphery, and it's driven a lot of people away. I know I'm not the only one there.
Well, and then people have brought up the political commentary, which really isn't extreme on ESPN, but like the right-wing people have said, it's too liberal. These people are liberal. They're tuning out, getting away from ESPN because of that. Now, I think it's kind of hyperbole, and it's been hyped up more than it truly is or what ESPN truly stands for as. I think it's commentators, maybe on social media. And the most notable one is a local product, right, Jamel Hill, who's come under fire for what she has said in the past about Donald Trump and stuff. But that's kind of outside of what I think ESPN is aiming for and what it really stands for. Like this Get Up show now, Joey, and I don't know if you've really tuned into it a lot, but it seems like it's staying away from that. And Mike Greenberg has been known as being like vanilla, Mr. Vanilla. He's not going to dive deep into that. Right. And Michelle Beadle and Jalen Rose are his cohorts, right? They're not going to really, on that show, dive into that either.
Yeah, and I know that Mike Greenberg, before the show started, was adamant kind of in some of the press and some of the stuff he was talking about, saying this is a sports show. I think people were labeling it just by kind of the people that are on the show, and it's sort of a mix of different personalities, that it might be just this sort of variety type thing. And he was trying to let people know this is sports, but I don't know, somehow it gives off the vibe that it is a little bit kind of a mixed bag, and it's not hard hitting. I mean, even with Mike and Mike, that was pretty much all sports. I mean,
that was always sports,
wasn't
right?
Much fluff to that.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe it's just a little bit of an odd combination in terms of him and Jalen and Michelle Beadle. And I don't know, maybe people aren't quite clear what they're tuning in for. Maybe the show wasn't particularly sharp in the way that it marketed itself.
And I think it came under fire for that, too. Because like Mike Greenberg, you're right. There was like a Hollywood Reporter story, and the headline, made it sound like it's going to be a woke, woke the term, and it's going to be like, about politics a little bit or about social issues,
justice,
right?
Yeah.
It's not going to be about that. So
Right.
people, if they were tuning in for that, they're going to be, they're being misled, and they're not going to like probably the format in the show in, which it's done.
Yeah, like you guys both said. I mean, I think ESPN for a long time has done sports really well. And I think sometimes the more they try and branch out a little bit, whether it be politically or pop culture stuff, I think generally it winds up not going so well. I mean, they even tried sort of involving Barstool Sports for a minute. And
it lasts, right? One
like
episode, and that was it? Yeah.
So I think there's plenty of people out there that are just sports fans that don't want a whole lot more than that they're fine just getting the highlights and analysis and not all the screaming and yelling and arguing.
Ranting and raving. You don't like it yourself, Joe?
Like you guys pointed out. I mean, it gets to be. I mean, how can you have such passionate opinions about everything every day? It's hard to do that. I think, sometimes it, like you say, it feels staged in a way, and those guys have made names that way. I mean, Skip Bayless was obviously a columnist for a lot of years, but most people probably don't know that. They just know him as somebody who screams and yells on TV a lot. And I think Fox Sports tried going in that direction, and
look at what happened over there, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I know that the head guy who really was so passionate about the debate stuff wound up getting fired from the network, Jamie Horowitz.
Yeah.
So, we'll see where things go, but I think people still are most just wanting to watch SportsCenter when it comes down to it.
And you know what? It's worked out, though, for the likes of Skip Bayless and Stephen A. Smith. And really quick, you had brought up Barstool Sports, which they did the show. It lasted one episode, like it was at 11:30 on ESPN2. I don't think anybody was really tuning into it anyways. But Barstool Sports now is a Sirius XM radio channel and whatnot. So, Isaiah, I wanted to ask you, if you had to consume all your sports content from Barstool Sports, if it was only Barstool, would you do it, or would you just say forget sports?
Absolutely not. That might be just my bent with Barstool. I'm not the biggest Barstool fan out there, but I mean it's silly. But I understand that it's more of a millennial geared. I know people that really appreciate it and love Barstool. It's for me. I'm a little bit older, I guess, a little bit more old fashioned. To me, it's like, don't reinvent the wheel. I just want sports, but other people might need whatever kind of weird commentary that they seem to want to have. They obviously, like, I swear a lot in real life, but I don't feel like I need a lot of swearing in my sports coverage. I just don't. I don't see any reason for it. I think it's like they one-upped Deadspin, and Deadspin was already kind of meh as it was, so I don't really understand it. But I could see where some people would. I could see where a lot of people. I know Dave Portnoy follows me, so no, if you're listening to this,
sorry, Dave.
No. Yeah, I'm not knocking you. You're obviously doing a really good job at what you're doing. It's just not my type of thing, and I can see where some people might enjoy it. But I mean, just give me like straightforward sports coverage, guys. That's all I want. I don't care from where. That's all I want. Why is no one giving us that anymore?
But it's not the kind of sports content that everybody wants. But some people want it, and actually I think a lot more than we think want it. And I guess transitioning from that into the Michigan spring game that didn't happen, that some people did want to occur still. Now, the weather was horrible. It was canceled. But it was already a 7 o'clock start to start, and then it became a 5:45 start. I didn't understand, Isaiah, why it was going to be a 7 p.m. primetime event. Like, what's the point of doing that for a spring game?
Well, part of it, I think, I actually, for me, the bigger question was why didn't they have it this upcoming weekend? Because they aren't having further practices in Paris when they go next week. So I don't understand why they wanted to have the spring game kind of in the middle. Usually a spring game is the culmination. Last year they changed that because they were going to be spending the week in Rome. This year, obviously, wasn't the case. So I'm not really sure why they decided to still have it kind of in the middle of their spring practice schedule. Having it prime time, I mean, a part of that I think had to do with the idea that Ohio State's was already set, and it was set, earlier in the day. You had Ohio State. I think Illinois had one that was supposed to be. All of them pretty much canceled except for Ohio State that were set for this past Saturday. Primetime event also for the idea of like you're getting people in seats for it being something maybe a little bit more special. Big recruiting weekend. They were hosting. They hosted the number one guy over in the 2019 class. I don't know if he made it to both Ohio State and Michigan, but that's also a good reason why, is because he was a guy that's from Columbus. That we're talking about Zach Harrison, of course. He was a guy who was going to go to. He's from Columbus, was going to go to Ohio State and then come to Michigan. Which still, that's a huge win for Michigan to get him back on campus. He's been up there a few times, as it were, but that's a reason to have it be kind of an event, is to try to coerce some guys like, hey, listen, our spring game is going to be this boring, normal, scrimmage situation, which is what it would have been regardless. But at the same time, like, look at the panache that goes with this. Yes, Ohio State's going to fill Ohio Stadium. We still have that kind of passion up here. We're still going to be able to do something different. We're thinking outside of the box. That's kind of what Jim Harbaugh does. He thinks outside of the box constantly.
And he does always, yes.
They had a night spring game on a Friday night a couple of years ago. It was 2 spring games ago. Went really well. Stadium was pretty much full. Ended up being a really exciting matchup. This wasn't going to be that because they weren't drafting like they have the last couple of years under Jim Harbaugh. This was just going to be a situational scrimmage, kind of a lot more like the last couple of years Brady Hoke had. At the same time, that's kind of what gets people more, in tune, especially after the season this last year, where I think, excitement surrounding Michigan football is pretty far down.
And now I heard from an alum, and it's not the alum that maybe some people think I'm speaking of that I'm, kind of associated with, but another alum, actually, that said that they think this game was canceled to kind of hide the fact that Michigan doesn't have a ton of talent or as much talent as it once featured under Harbaugh. Do you think it could be that a little bit, Isaiah? Not to stir the pot here, right, and to start a hot take. We were just making fun of people that start the hot takes. But, I mean, what are your thoughts on that being said? And I think other alums truly feel that way, at least older alums, when they're talking about Harbaugh and this specific spring game being canceled. I
think it's actually the opposite. I think Michigan actually has, right now on its roster, probably some of the most talent that it's ever had. I do see that. I have heard that from other alums and everything as well, that they are kind of questioning everything. But you look top to bottom, especially considering, the talent he brought in the 2016 and 2017 classes. They're a little bit older. I'm seeing just so much, there's so much competition. I'm kind of wondering how some of these guys are going to see the field. We're hearing about Oliver Martin, for instance, a wide receiver that came out of the 2017 class out of Iowa City. I just am curious, he's having a really good spring, but when is he going to get reps? You've already got other guys like Grant Perry and Kakoa Crawford and Eddie McDoom that could kind of fill that same role. Less Crawford, but he's already going up in a spot that already has essentially a couple players deep as it is. So I'm seeing a lot of talent. The only thing that I would think, if there was a possibility of them trying to maybe shield anything, it's possibly just, the state of the offense. I don't think that's the case. I think that from every insider that and I shouldn't say insider, every source that I spoke to about how things have gone this spring, offensively, it looks completely different than it did a year ago. Quarterback position, offensive line, those being the big key places. And obviously things did not gel or kind of work at all a year ago, in big part because of those two positions. But I'm hearing that it's going really well. But if there was anything, that's where I would think that they'd want to hide. And that still could be the case, especially, maybe they don't want to show how things are different with Shea Patterson potentially being the quarterback if eligible. So you know how Harbaugh likes to hide things in that sense, doesn't want to name his quarterback. Everyone knew it was going to be Wilton Speight last year. I knew it was going to be Wilton Speight the year before, and a lot of people were saying it was going to be John O'Corn. But he's trying to hide those things for the maximum competitive advantage. Wherever he can find a competitive advantage, he's going to take it. So that very well could have been it. Didn't want to put things on tape for everyone to see, like, hey, look at those RPOs that Shea Patterson does. Maybe there's some designed, read option in type. I don't know.
So hiding the new toys, maybe even, and disguising some of the plays and the guys that are actually gelling this time around, where I know, like you were already saying, really, anybody that watched U of M football, right, even a game last year, thought the quarterback play is not good enough, the line play is not good enough. This year it's got to be different. They want to turn around things, right?
Oh, absolutely. And I expect the offense to be a lot better. Harbaugh had said going into the spring that he had done a thorough self-scout. Obviously, you've got a lot of new coaches that they've brought in, from Sharon Moore, tight ends coach, who was from Central Michigan, was at Louisville previously. He's done a really good job at every stop he's been at. He's talked about how he's got like all these basically shiny new toys. Zach Gentry had a breakout year this last year. It was his first year really finally getting on the field. Former quarterback out of New Mexico, former Texas commit at that. Just really broke out last year. Second in receiving yards for the Wolverines. And Sean McCune, who was actually led the team in pass receptions. They combined to have more yards than Jake Butt did a year before. I know you're looking at one guy compared to two guys, but really that particular room has so much talent. Nick Eubanks went out very early with injury, but he was more of a wide receiver as it was. He could be I wouldn't say necessarily like your Gronk. He's not like that type of body or anything like that, but he could be, he's not as big as Jimmy Graham, but he's probably a little bit more of that type of guy where it's like you can throw the ball up to him and get him. He obviously had that really big catch against Florida in game 1 last year. So you have that room. Then you've got the wide receivers. Jim McElwain, former head coach of Florida, is there coaching. I don't know why people aren't more excited about that, by the way. People want to, I guess, lampoon the idea that, the shark picture and everything like
Which
that.
was hilarious, by the way. It was viral for a reason, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Or they want to take a look at, like how Florida did offensively last year. I think it's a little short-sighted because he wasn't actually running that offense. Yes, he's the head coach. He had Doug Nussmeier, who now has a 4-year track record of really having really bad offenses. Last really good offense he had was the one in Alabama, and that was one he took over from and already working from Jim McElwain. So to me, I think that's such a great coup for Michigan. As a guy who's won the SEC East 2 years in a row, obviously had a bad year last year. The death threats thing is kind of what did him in and everything, but that's such a great addition. He's a guy that's had like stellar success pretty much everywhere down the line, with the exception of both his head coaching job in Florida and his 1 year in Oakland with the Raiders. That was one of the years where the Raiders were terrible. They had I can't even remember his name. Aaron Brooks, I believe, was the quarterback, the former New Orleans Saint. And then he was out for half the season, and they have another quarterback. If you told me his name right now, I would not be able to even confirm it. That's
just very irrelevant dudes.
Absolutely.
It's about the talent that you're working with as well. Like him at Bama. I mean, think about these guys that go to Bama. I mean, you got loads of talent year in, year out. So, I mean, it makes it easier. Now, I'm not trying to take anything away from these coaches, defensive guys or offensive guys, but when you have all that talent year in, year out, right, doesn't it make you look a lot better than maybe you really are, too?
Oh, absolutely. And that's kind of what you saw with Bama this last year. Everyone was saying the things about, like, a couple, true freshmen come in and win the national championship game. Look at everyone who's surrounding those true freshmen. Yeah, you did have Alex Leatherwood able to come in late in the game at left tackle. You had Tua Tagovailoa At quarterback, they're still surrounded by 5 stars across the board. Jim McElwain is walking into a similar situation as far as the wide receivers room. He's walking in with Tariq Black was probably the best wide receiver on the team before his injury, which is pretty astonishing for a true freshman. 5-star Donovan Peoples-Jones, former, obviously local product, was once the top wide receiver in the entire class. And then Nico Collins out of Alabama, high 4-star. Oliver Martin, high 4-star. And then that's not even precluding some of the other guys that are in the room that have been there, like Crawford was an Army All-American, like Eddie McDoom was a highly sought-after 3-star. So they have guys in that room. To me, probably the most important coaching addition that they brought, though, for Michigan on the offensive side of the ball was Ed Warner, the former Ohio State offensive coordinator. He was the offensive coordinator coming in under Urban Meyer, also was coaching the offensive line. They took away the offensive line, went offensive coordinator, I believe tight ends, if I'm not mistaken, for a minute, and that's when the offense started to kind of not have that Urban Meyer look. But the guy's had unbelievable success everywhere he's gone. He's the first coach that's will have ever coached at Ohio State, Michigan State, Notre Dame, and Michigan, which is kind of interesting, but especially Michigan being his last stop. Came over to Michigan from Minnesota, and after 1 year there, did a good job pulling in some recruits there. Already has a relationship with some of the guys at Michigan that he recruited, like Jalen Mayfield, who's going to be coming in as an offensive tackle out of Grand Rapids, the former Minnesota commit. So there's a lot of really interesting guys that he has to work with. But the one thing that's really important is that we're hearing a ton about how he simplified things. Last year, Michigan did a mixture of power read and zone read for the way the offensive line blocked, and it just seemed like it kind of confused things. There's not that I should say that there isn't really that kind of confusion anymore. Things are simplified. They understand what they're doing. Hearing so much from so many of the guys on and off the record about how they just now know what they're supposed to do, whereas before there was maybe a little bit of not sure, what guy I'm supposed to get here. I'm not really sure what's supposed to happen on this play. Try to get this guy, but what do I do after that? Now we're hearing that they're able to just kind of read and react. And Warner, he's a tough, hard-nosed guy. He's going to run power. He's going to do things the way that Michigan did well last year. Michigan excelled there. And so if he can get the pass protection to be better, and we're hearing more and more that it is, then Michigan could be way, way different record-wise next year.
Well, I really think, too, Isaiah and Joey, that, when you have too much going on, too many of the bells and whistles, like I really thought U of M, Harbaugh, the offensive schemes were overcomplicated. They try to implement too much, and why not just simplify it? So if Warner and Harbaugh and all these offensive assistants can simplify the offense this season, Joey, that's going to be the biggest thing, I think, for Michigan to make progress from last year to this year.
Yeah, and I also think, really, I think if you watch Michigan over the years with Harbaugh, and even sometimes his time with San Francisco, I think they could be more inventive, or at least a little bit more imaginative sometimes. I think you see Michigan a lot of times 2nd and 2 or 2nd and 1. Those are opportunities to go down the field because you kind of have a couple downs there left, and I think you see Michigan a lot of times just get the first down. I think it's a little bit more of a conservative approach. You didn't see big production from the wide receivers last year. I don't know if that's more a byproduct of some of the injuries that they had. Maybe some of the guys are a little bit younger, or just not trying to explore the downfield options as much. But I think, in today's game of football, both at the college and pro level, it really is kind of offensively dominated. So if you're not trying to put up points and you're kind of just securing first downs and not taking those chances when you have the opportunity, I think the game, you're trying to almost fit a square peg in a round hole a little bit. You can't play like Michigan under Schembechler. Not that they're doing
not the
that.
old school,
not that
be a little bit more
to,
innovative,
not
though.
Not that they're
still
trying to win a Rose Bowl without completing a pass like they did, with Rick Leach and all that. But, when they play Ohio State and the explosive offense that they have, they can't keep up. They almost had them a couple years ago, but 0-3 against Ohio State thus far with Harbaugh, and those are the results that people are paying closest attention to. The games against Rutgers and Maryland and Indiana,
they don't really matter in the grand
really
scheme of things because those are like rollover cakewalk games, right? Or should be at least.
And this is year 4, so I don't know how much. Not that the guy's in danger of losing his job, but just as far as the public perception and the alumni. If you go this year and you wind up, 1-7 overall to the Spartans and the Buckeyes over 4 years, both games this year on the road, that's going to be hard to defend. Those are the games that people pay closest attention to, And it's kind of put up or shut up time this year, I think, year 4.
And when you only have beaten Sparty of Sparty and the Buckeyes, and the year that you beat Sparty, Sparty was miserable. What, a 3-9 team? I mean, I know it was on the road, East Lansing, but still, it wasn't really a quality W against your rival when Sparty was as bad as it was, Joey.
No, I mean, that was kind of a forgettable game.
Yeah, nobody even cares about that game at this point,
Michigan
I think.
was kind of just motoring through them for large parts of the game. And, this year's game maybe was a little bit fluky in terms of the weather conditions, but, they were playing under the same set of circumstances, and Michigan State found a way to pull it out. A few years ago, you could make the claim that some Michigan fans do that the Michigan, for all intents and purposes, won that game at home up till the last play when, the punt went wrong and Jalen Watts-Jackson took it in. But at the end of the day, it's really just it's a wins and losses.
Yeah, it doesn't count. You didn't win the game. It didn't happen, right?
And, for everything that Jim Harbaugh has brought to the program and all the attention and the big things that he's done and the spotlight that he's put on the team, if you can't start winning some of these big games, the interstate games and the rivalry games, people aren't going to remember that you went to Italy, went to Paris, you had the satellite camps, you brought in...
Hey, you met the Pope, Joe. Come on, man.
Yeah, you brought in all the celebrities for the signing day ritual and all that. And I think this is a big year obviously, it's a big year, and a lot of it will depend on, what happens with the quarterback situation, because I think it's been a little bit unstable the last couple of years. I mean, if you're at Michigan and you can kind of have your pick of the litter in a sense of the athletes at different positions, you got to have better quarterback play. I mean, it's been okay. Wilton Spade a couple years ago was pretty good. This past year, they really couldn't figure out who was the quarterback. And, this year, if Shea Patterson's there, maybe it's different. But if not, again, it kind of winds up being a mixed bag again.
And Brian Lewerke was much better than all the U of M passers this past season, including Spate, O'Korn, Peters. And now I think it's put up or shut up time as well for Harbaugh. I think it really is. He better win 10 games this year. And the thing is, how highly dependent is that upon Shea Patterson, Isaiah, being eligible?
I mean, I don't think it's entirely dependent on. I think they have the best quarterback room that they've had under Harbaugh at this point, and I wouldn't say it's put up or shut up time. At least not in the eyes of
not being fired. Though I'm not trying to say being fired. He's not going to get axed, but you better
just but solely based off of kind of the circumstances going in. He had a young team last year. Obviously, it's and injuries obviously stemmed their ability, as we saw with bad quarterback play. I think if Wilton Spate remained healthy, they didn't have to do the carousel that they did. I think Michigan probably does win 10 games last year. I think they probably win. I mean, they were competitive in every game except for Penn State. And, a lot of things were there for the taking, and they just couldn't take it. Even in the Penn State game, there were some things there for the taking, but they just had no way to be able to block anybody or make a throw downfield. For Shea Patterson and everything, yeah, I think that you probably have the best season that you possibly can have if Shea Patterson is A, eligible, and B, plays up to his potential. But you also have to keep in mind, this is his first year in a system. Mm-hmm. I know Michigan's going to change things up for him, make things comfortable for him. They obviously want to see him come in. I think his goal is probably to come in, have 1 year, have it be so good that he can jet off to the NFL. But if it isn't Shea Patterson, I think Brandon Peters showed you some things last year. I think the long-term memory hasn't existed very well for a lot of Michigan fans due to the short-term memory from the way the bowl game played out. But you have to keep in mind that's his first game back after having sustained an injury to the likes that he hadn't sustained before. He's had a concussion before, but never to the severity that he had. And then there's some rust, some things like that. Obviously, he didn't have a very good bowl game. Show me a quarterback in college football who's had every single game be perfect. Obviously, this was a far cry, but I think Michigan's still in very good position between him. Dylan McCaffrey, I still think needs to add some weight, but I've heard a lot of good things about what the new strength coach Ben Herbert's done as far as really getting guys to bulk on. I've seen McCaffrey once at unavailability coming out of the building. He was wearing a coat, so I couldn't tell you if he actually put on the necessary weight to actually be able to be a Big Ten quarterback. But I've heard a lot of great things about what he's done in practice. I think they're just set up a lot better than they were before, where it's we saw and we know what John O'Korn is, and that's not a knock on John O'Korn, but unfortunately he in Michigan's system just wasn't a fit. It didn't work. He couldn't make those necessary reads to really be able to do things, because let's face it, as uninventive as Michigan's offense looks, it's actually insanely complicated. It's the most complicated offense probably in all of college football, and every opposing coach has said that about going into facing Michigan's offense. You have to prepare for 40 plus different looks. And that's not something that usually you see in college football. It's usually like Ohio State is the opposite. They're like, here's what we do well, have fun, try and stop it. Michigan's the opposite of lots of smoke and mirrors, lots of different things like that. So Shea Patterson has to be able to be in command of that on top of everything else. I think obviously he will be. I think he's that type of quarterback. He's transcendent at the position. I saw him for a week down in Army All-American game. I kind of hated how good he was, especially because it was him versus Brandon Peters and KJ Costello from Stanford, all vying for that starting quarterback position for that particular Army All-American team. He's got a lot that he can do, but I think that if he's not able to go, Brandon Peters is going to be just fine.
So he's the next guy up, and then McCaffrey after that.
I would imagine so, yeah. And then it would be absolute catastrophe if Joe Milton sees
had
the
to
field.
play, and he's number 4.
Yes. Yeah, because I would say Michael Sessa, probably the walk-on, would probably see time before Joe Milton because they're going to want to preserve that red shirt for Milton. He's something of a project, but we've heard about how good he's been this spring as well. He's been making a lot of throws. He's been the most prepared quarterback as far as knowing, coming in and trying to know the playbook, which is really, really impressive for an early enrollee true freshman. But again, you're in absolute danger land if you are actually getting a true freshman to start.
Yeah, it's no good. Not in the Big Ten, man. Not against the big boys or against anybody at the D1 level, really.
No, not with the guys that they already have. I mean, they've got some guys that can really do a lot of things. And I would urge people not to write off Brandon Peters. I don't think he'll end up getting the nod if Shea Patterson is eligible, just again because Patterson's that talented. But at the same time, I mean, he's had a couple years under Harbaugh's system. I know he's had the transition from Dreadfish to Pep Hamilton and everything, but he can make those throws. He's got a strong arm. He's obviously really smart. Who knows how that Wisconsin game would have gone if he wouldn't have been knocked out, because he seemed to be able to move the ball against, at that time was the nation's number 1 defense. And he did a really good job in every game that he came in, except for honestly the one. And he had a okay half, the first half, and then the second half all went kind of terrible.
So what's a good comp for Shea Patterson? Is he the next Johnny Manziel, the next Baker Mayfield, the guy that can roll out and throw it on the run, throw it all the way down the field, and with accuracy and precision and all that good stuff? I mean, who would you compare him to?
Yeah, I think a lot of people say Johnny Manziel, but I like the Baker Mayfield one a little bit more. He's really inventive. I mean, they both were really inventive. He's not the tallest guy. He's like 6'3", 6'4". Doesn't even seem that tall. Has mobility. They can design some kind of read option things for him if they want to, but he is more of a pro style quarterback. But things where for him they get really good for when things break down. I mean, it can go either way. Of course, he'll make some decisions that are questionable, like anyone that finds themselves in that position. But he can make plays downfield when a play breaks down. He has the mobility to use his legs if the play breaks down, and he can use his arm. So it's just going to be a matter of limiting the mistakes. And I think that's probably Michigan really preaches ball security, trying to make it so he's not throwing those costly interceptions. In his 10 games of play, in his first 2 years of play, he's thrown for over 3,000 yards. I don't remember the touchdown to interception ratio, but it's favorable. But in some of those big games against really good defenses where Ole Miss lost, like last year against Alabama and LSU, not a very good touchdown interception ratio.
And that's the criticism right now of him. I've heard on talk radio. Trust me, we listen to talk radio too. It's all about, he's only done it against the small boys, right? Not the big boys, not the real teams that matter.
Well, he's had some good games against some good teams. He had a really good game against Auburn last year, for instance. Auburn obviously looked like they were going to make it into the college football playoff until they got beat by Georgia the second time they faced each other. Auburn beat Alabama, so that was a huge game for him. He had a really good game there. Obviously, yeah, some of his stats came against Tennessee Martin. So,
but you know what? The contrarian point of view is that everybody plays those kind of teams too, right? Those cakewalk teams are the lesser
absolutely.
Teams that you play to start the season. Everybody's playing those teams to start the season.
Yeah, you always hear from D1 athletes. They always mention those guys are on scholarship too, and they're on scholarship for a reason. And that is the case. I mean, not everyone's going up and putting up those types of numbers against those particular schools. Yeah, those teams are beating them, but they might be beating them in different ways. You still have to play them. You still have to find ways to beat them. When you look at what Michigan did last year, Michigan did not have a very good aerial game in any game except for against Purdue when John O'Korn kind of came in, played out of his mind, and what seemed to be a revenge game for him. Other than that, Michigan didn't have a 400-yard game. They didn't have a 300-yard game. So for the fact that Shea Patterson was able to come in and throw for almost 500 yards against Tennessee Martin,
he's done that. It still matters. It's still saying something, even if it's a non-FBS school or low-tier school. I mean, it doesn't really matter if you're doing that.
You're still able to make your reads. You're still able to make your throws and read coverages and things of that nature. Yeah, they might not be as good as other teams, but he still has had success against solid teams like Auburn. And some of the games that they played in, like against Cal, they lost to Cal, I believe, last year. He still had a good game, but their defense can hold up. Things of that nature. So it will be a little bit different when he's got a more complete team to work with, because Ole Miss isn't exactly a type of team where you'd say like, yeah, they've got an offense and a defense, and they're able to do a lot of things on both sides of the ball. Michigan's a lot more dynamic in that sense. Michigan's way closer to having that complete team. I mean, you can see it all kind of coalescing right now. You've got top to bottom roster-wise almost everything that you would want. You just maybe a couple more years of recruiting before it gets to be that point where you say, all right, now they have everything that you want to be able to contend for a national championship year in, year out.
And really, in the grand scheme of things, Isaiah, Michigan, and Joey, you can comment on this too, is in a better state, right, as a football program than Ole Miss. And is going to get more talent year in, year out, and to have both sides of the ball be complete sides of the ball, right, offense and defense.
Absolutely. Ole Miss didn't. They were in the, I believe, the lower tier as far as defense was concerned. Now he's going to a team that had the number 3 defense overall last year, number 1 pass defense, number 1 defense overall the year before. They're a top 5 defense the year before that. So he's going to a team that has a lot of things going for it on the other side of the ball. Michigan actually had leads in, and I believe 4 of their 5 losses in the second half last year, and lost those leads. But a lot of that wasn't because the defense wasn't very good. It was more because the offense couldn't sustain any drives.
Couldn't stay on the field long enough, right, for the defense, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So you're looking at a much different situation. Being able to go in. You would imagine that going and playing a team like Ohio State, they'd at least be able to look back a couple years ago in 2016. Michigan's able to get 1 first down in that fourth quarter late in the game. If they're able to run the ball, that game goes completely differently. But they had to put it all on the defense, and eventually it broke down after a while. Eventually Ohio State finally figured out what Don Brown was doing, which was split zone and man coverage, on other sides of the field. So that becomes a completely different scenario when you have somebody who can maybe make enough plays to at least get you that first down and be able to get it with his arm, his legs, and everything like that. So it puts Michigan in a much more advantageous position in that light. Yeah,
I mean, Joey, your defense is bound to break if your offense isn't staying on the field and sustaining drives like Isaiah was talking about.
Right. And I think it's a big deal. I mean, I think there's a reason that the Shea Patterson stuff is getting as much attention as it is, and people are wondering what the outcome is going to be because, for as much as Peters kind of showed last year and what Wilton Spate was able to do when he was the quarterback, O'Korn for spells, these guys aren't potential top 5 NFL draft picks. So, it's a big deal for that type of player to be possibly under center for Michigan. I think it's hard to see them, competing for a conference championship or a national championship with quarterbacks that aren't really on that level. That's hard to do. I mean, you need a really good player at that position, unless you are like Alabama and you have this NFL
There's
defense.
Talent everywhere. Yeah.
So, just kind of looking at the last few years of quarterback play, I think it would be a huge addition if he's eligible. I kind of think that he had some assurance maybe when he made that decision to leave that he was going to get to play. I'm a little surprised it's taking as long as it has. But, I don't know exactly how the NCAA works through these things always. But, like you guys have mentioned, I mean, this guy, I don't think so many Michigan fans have necessarily seen him play. I mean, I don't know how many Michigan fans are watching Ole Miss at, 3:30 on a Saturday on SEC Plus or whatever it is. But pretty clearly the guy is going to be an upgrade over what Harbaugh has had the last few years. And then, with the amount of weapons like Gentry at tight end and, Black coming back and some of the other receivers, the hope is that the offense kind of gets out of some of those doldrums, like the game at Wisconsin, maybe it was windy or whatever, and it was hard to move the ball there.
Or like the MSU game, you
Michigan
probably win
State,
that game with a more equipped, capable quarterback. Yeah.
Even the bowl game, I don't think was tremendously high scoring.
That was a winnable game
Carolina.
too. I would say that South Carolina game and that Michigan State game were games that I think you would have won with a more capable starting quarterback.
It's time for the offense to kind of do its part and start putting up, 30-plus points. And I think at that point, with the talent that Michigan generally has on defense, the results should start to be there, better than 8-5 last year.
Well, you got to help out the D eventually. And you know what? If you want to keep friends that play on defense, right, keep those friends, you better start picking up your end of the line, I guess. And offensively, I think it will happen with Shea. And really quick, is he a top 5 guy? What do you think, guys? First of you, Joey. I mean, a guy that will be drafted at least high in the first round next year if he does play this year at U of M and decides to come out, obviously.
Yeah, like Isaiah said, I mean, I don't think he's the tallest guy, but sometimes that's, a knock on quarterbacks when he's listed at, 6'2 or 6'3 or whatever it is.
By the way, I would take that 6'2", 6'3".
Yeah,
Anyways,
right. I think most of us would take that. But at quarterback now, if you're not 6'6",
it matters. You got to be tall,
you really have
right?
to be an exceptional athlete. And I'll be honest, like probably a lot of followers of college football in this area, I haven't seen a ton of, game film on Shea Patterson. It's just kind of what you read about, what you hear about. And everything you do read about is that, yeah, he is that type of guy, a top 5 type guy. And then to have a platform like Michigan, if he were to come in and have a 10-2 type season or compete for a conference championship or have a great game against Ohio State, that goes a long way. So yeah, and like one of you guys said, it might be his plan to kind of have one real big year and then leave. I think the hope is that by bringing him in and going through all the red tape and all that you get 2 years.
Yeah, he
out
better
of him.
stay now.
I think that's the hope.
Yeah, they're hoping for that, but will it happen? Yeah, that's a different question, right? What do you think about that, Isaiah, about whether or not he stays past this year? If he really lights it up, lights the world on fire, will he leave after this year and become a top 5 NFL draft prospect, overall-wise, too?
I mean, I think if he's top 5 NFL draft prospect, there's no way he comes back.
He better go, obviously. So it depends on where he would be slotted in the first round to go, right?
Absolutely. I mean, obviously you do see it every now and again, a guy stay that you think, like, maybe you should go, like Baker Mayfield did a couple years ago, kind of looked like, dude, you kind of look like you're a first-round draft pick. But if it's that kind of, like, borderline thing, between being in the, proverbial, the, quote, lottery of the NFL, which, obviously they don't have a lottery, but I think if he's anywhere in the top 10, he's gone. I think that's the goal and the intent is for him to be able to come in and do that, and you develop Peters for another year, and you still have him for a little bit. Whether it be Peters or McCaffrey or whoever you bring in, you're getting them another year closer, because even though before this year, guys like Brandon Peters weren't looked at as a project. When you have a guy that's basically a can't miss type like Shea Patterson, that kind of changes the way you do things. You have another, a year of being able to have them compete with Shea, and that's huge because, like, Brandon Peters last year wasn't competing with John O'Korn and Wilton Speight. He wasn't taking those first team reps. He wasn't trying to beat them out as much after the first week of fall camp because those other two separated themselves. Now he's going up against a guy that's better than any of those. And that will make him better just in and of itself. And he's the guy that's going to be getting those reps, opposite Patterson. So that, that's where it's actually kind of exciting because you're building that depth. You're building that competition.
Mm-hmm.
And
but you're saying it wasn't there for Peters at least last year. He didn't have a shot to start.
Absolutely not. No, not then. We'd been saying that forever too. People were really excited about a spring game in which he threw for 50%, but still he made 2 big throws, and everyone said he needs to be the starting quarterback.
But you knew he wasn't going to be the starter anyway, no matter what he did.
No, there was no way then. I mean, obviously experience is huge. You can't teach experience. I've been preaching that. You hear coaches say that all the time because people always want to see that shiny new toy. Here's the good news: Shea Patterson has 2 years of experience. He's got significantly more experience than Brandon Peters. Brandon Peters is listed as having played in 6 games. One of those games doesn't count at all. He came in for 4 snaps against Purdue to ice the game just so he could get out on the field. That was it. So he's got 5 games of practical experience. And didn't even get to play in all of those games. Missed the first quarter against Rutgers. Obviously missed the last quarter and a half against Wisconsin. But you got a guy in Shea Patterson who's played the majority of 10 games. So you're looking at a guy who's played more than double that and has thrown for over 3,000 yards. You can't ask for much better than that, especially with Michigan, what they needed. And then the fact that he has mobility to maybe make up for offensive line deficiencies that might not even be there this next year because of Ed Warner. You've got a much more dynamic situation. So because of all of that, I think he's probably going to have a good enough year to be able to go. And if he's able to go, I think he's probably gone. But Michigan will still be in amazing, capable hands due to the depth that they've built. because then that next year, now you've got Peters, you've got McCaffrey, and then you can even think about putting in a Joe Milton.
But really, it comes down to, first and foremost, will he play? Will he be eligible? What's the latest on what you're hearing regarding that? Because I know, like, Brandon Justice and others, like Brandon Justice was on the DSP network way back in the day now to report this and said he had heard way back that he was going to for sure play. What's the latest that you have heard, at least?
Oh, I mean, I think that's the expectation still. Ole Miss, they obviously responded, and they didn't take the high road. They really should have just not responded. They didn't have to respond to the NCAA and to Michigan's suit to say, hey, this is why Shea needs to be eligible. Felt misled. They were already under sanctions and everything like that. It's kind of ridiculous that they even did respond, but they did. So now it's just another waiting game. Now it goes to the NCAA, because if Ole Miss would have said, hey, you know what, we say whatever, that doesn't necessarily mean that he was going to get to play. Either the NCAA has to make that rule, or they have to absolutely actually approve that he's eligible. I don't see any way he isn't. Obviously, Ole Miss put their improprieties right out there. You have a pretty solid case with several guys that want to leave. It would be one thing, I think, if it was just Shea, but considering that there's 7 different guys that are, all felt the same kind of misleading. They put the Thomas Mars, the attorney out of Arkansas, put that all together and everything and submitted it. It sounds like it's still an open and shut case, just a matter of when. So I would actually be pretty surprised if he's not eligible, I guess is where I'm at with that. I would be very, very surprised, even though the NCAA does tend to bungle things. But it's still just going to be a waiting game until the NCAA just kind of takes their time and does their due diligence.
And you brought up his attorney, Thomas Mars. He told the Free Press that he was like 75% certain at least that he would become eligible to play. But then you look at, like, at the high school level, Joe and I can totally reflect upon this, like the MHSAA, maybe like the NCAA a little bit in terms of maybe expressing a little bit of sour grapes. And now they're saying they're looking out for the student athlete, but like, at Dakota, you had a kid that transferred from Dakota to Clarkston, Thomas Kithier, which maybe you've heard about too, Isaiah. Yeah. They didn't let him play at Clarkston this year. Sour grapes really from Dakota, prohibiting Kithier from being able to play at Clarkston in his senior year on top of it. And Clarkston won. He was still able to practice and stuff, and him and Foster Loyer going off to Michigan State to play together. But still, I mean, I don't like that, the sound of it. And Joe, it seems like you have a similar case here a little bit with Ole Miss and the NCAA, and obviously it's sour grapes from Ole Miss too, at least a little bit, or I would say to a large extent, perhaps, too.
And I think there's more merit to what Patterson's trying to do. I mean, he's leaving a situation that is unstable, and some of the violations and sanctions against Ole Miss and the issues that they have, whereas I think Thomas Kithier was maybe just trying to go to a better basketball program.
It was totally that, yeah. Where Shea Patterson had a lot of other reasons, too.
So there's more validity to what Shea Patterson, what some of the other Ole Miss players are trying to do, where they're trying to get out from under a bad situation. I mean, that was the whole phone tree thing with calling the women, right? Correct? Hugh Freeze, is that what was going on there? Am I mixing that up?
I don't know. A bunch of different violations, so I think.
One of them, right? Wasn't a good.
He had to go. His reputation was tarnished by the end.
Right. So yeah, like you guys said, I mean, I think it would set a bad precedent, I think, to disallow the transfer and not allow him to be eligible, because it's not just out of nowhere like a Thomas Kithier thing, where it was really just more about improving
his stock as a player. Yeah.
Improving stock as a player. This is trying to go to a situation that's more stable, where there aren't penalties. And yeah, so I think that Patterson, like Isaiah said, I think he'll be Michigan's quarterback come first game of 2018. I think it would really look bad on Ole Miss and the NCAA if they didn't allow for this to happen.
Well, I think it would really be a slap in the face of Jim Harbaugh. It's like these people that don't like Jim Harbaugh. It's like the attack on Jim Harbaugh, like the satellite camp thing, and the new rule for that, which has prohibited all these satellite camps from happening, and him going on all these different tours for camps to see these recruits. So, I mean, it could be sour grapes once again from the SEC, and it seems like all these SEC schools, man, these schools hate Jim Harbaugh, too, and what he's done getting talent that they would have gotten right in the past before he got to U of M, Isaiah.
Oh, absolutely. There definitely does seem to be a vendetta. I mean, Hugh Freeze particularly, I know he's not at Ole Miss anymore, but, with the satellite camps and everything, he was one of the first people to come out and say, that he wanted to spend the time with his family, and that was such an absurd moment, because it's like, so you're decrying a guy for, wanting to go and work, and saying, because you want more time off. Like, that's not
Didn't come off right. I mean, it doesn't sound
No.
good PR-wise. Did not make him sound good.
No. And then, on top of that, you have all the violations and all of the different ways that he, misled and all of that. It's just kind of silly. But, yeah, the SEC, obviously, they've had that beef. And pretty much almost every coach there. Weirdly, McElwain didn't really have a thing with Harbaugh.
Oh, got him a job. Maybe he knew his job was on the line. He was on his way out. He said, I better not say anything about Harbaugh, right?
But then, even Kirby Smart, and Harbaugh had the back and forth where he got to refer to him as Georgia coach, and maybe Georgia coach should start thinking about. I can't remember exactly what he said. Butch Jones when he was at Tennessee had it. Obviously, there's been the stuff with Saban. So yeah, up and down. But obviously, Michigan is going and getting guys that they want in the SEC. Maybe obviously it's not top to bottom, but. Aubrey Solomon did not look like a guy that was gonna end up at Michigan, even though he committed to Michigan. During the summer, he went on, with those Georgia guys and looked like he was gonna flip to Georgia, like his former teammate Otis Reese ended up actually doing. But you're telling me that some of these guys that Michigan has wouldn't be stars on some SEC, ACC teams. Obviously ACC wanted Devin Bush Jr. and he's all Big Ten. He's I think he got some All-American nods and everything like that. Kind of. Can't remember too much, but they've got some players from the South like that were definitely coveted by some of those teams, and Michigan won out. And Rashawn Gary is one of them. He wasn't an SEC in the SEC footprint, but obviously everybody wanted him. And you look at where he's at now, and he's starting to live up to that number one overall recruit in the country type billing. And so yeah, obviously it riles up the satellite camps, the Twitter barbs and all of that. Doesn't help when Michigan opens the season to beating Florida. Obviously they lost to South Carolina at the end, but that doesn't help the SEC's absolute disdain for Harbaugh and the NCAA in general. It does feel kind of like he does things that fly in the face of looking for different competitive advantages, taking the team to Rome and having practice over there. I did think that initially when they came up with the idea, I don't think this is what it's about, but I think initially when they came up with the idea of having that abroad trip, it was to be like kind of a middle finger to the them saying that they couldn't go to places like IMG Academy for spring practice, which to me was such a brilliant thinking outside of the box idea. Like that was all about the SEC not wanting him to be on campus at IMG
taking
Academy.
Their players, really.
Exactly. Like they could come and do the same thing up here at Cass Tech. Obviously, they just don't want to. But they could have. And Cass Tech had enough players, when they had Donovan Peoples-Jones and Jalen Kelly-Powell. These are guys that Alabama, Florida, all those schools wanted. But they just didn't think of it first. And then Harbaugh thought to go to IMG. They only got, one guy from IMG from that particular cycle, and Cesar Ruiz. Wasn't like a huge deal. But I think that initially that taking the team to Rome thing was middle finger to the NCAA there. I think it became something more than that, obviously, with the whole, experience of it all. You mentioned Harbaugh meeting the Pope and things like that.
Pretty darn cool.
Yeah. But that's also the reason why the NCAA still hates him, is because he's thinking of different things. Mm-hmm. And honestly, they're all good for college football. That's the thing that's absurd. They just are mad about it. It's great for college football that these kids are getting to go and spend a week in. I wish I could go and spend a week.
Right, I think we all do.
Rome
I've never
Paris.
been to Italy. I'm Italian. I've never even been to Italy. I mean, I would love to go once.
Exactly. This is a great experience for these student athletes. But of course, the NCAA looks at these types of things unfavorably, even though just imagine if you're in college and they say, guess what? You're getting an all-expense paid trip someplace to learn about their culture.
Yeah, where do I sign up, right? Because it was a cultural experience. I know it was football first, obviously, when it's a football team, Harbaugh leading the football team there. But still, you gain the cultural aspects of things, too, and learn about the culture and everything that goes on in Italy that you wouldn't know without going to Italy, right?
Oh, absolutely. And that's where, that's where it does to get dicey about Shea Patterson. Because you just wonder, because this is better for college football in the sense of if he was misled, as he says he was, by, as several people have said they are, by Hugh Freeze and Ole Miss, and they have a pretty strong case considering what happened with Ole Miss and the coach before there, Tommy Tuberville. So that becomes really different. If they actually deny Shea Patterson, that's like, all right, you really are just looking out for the interests of your cash cows. And even though Michigan probably brings in a lot more money than Ole Miss, the SEC in general really is what seems to be what the NCAA tries to protect over and over again, considering what they've done to satellite camps, which was again, in the best interest of the student athletes, not for the institutions, yet they ruled for, look at what SMSB, the organization you work for.
Somebody, yeah.
What that used to be and what kind of showcase that was for so many, that first one I went to at Dakota High School, had 1,500 kids?
Huge. Lots of coaches and lots of players, and you get all these coaches there coming for the student athlete. It benefited the student athlete. That was the purpose of that camp, and a lot of these camps, all these camps, right? And the NCAA just took it all away from these student athletes, the access to these coaches, where they were getting exposure, and maybe for the first time, some of them too.
Absolutely, and a lot of it has to do, if not all of it, because of Michigan trying to hold similar camps elsewhere, and the SEC trying to protect its own interests. It's really absurd that the NCAA tends to rule in favor of the SEC and the ACC, but that's what they've done. So I guess maybe I said I would be shocked. Maybe I wouldn't be so shocked if they found a way to keep him ineligible just based off of the seeming vendetta. But at the same time, it only benefits the student athlete. It doesn't, if the schools under the sanctions that Ole Miss is under, those players should be able to go wherever they want.
They should be able to play right away. And then there's always been the debate, too, Joey, about these coaches that can jump from job to job, and they're eligible to coach right away. They don't have to sit out a year, right? They can take the money and run and go to that new university and coach, and it's no big deal.
Yeah, I think and it would be difficult if players had that freedom where they never had to sit out. I mean, I know especially in basketball, some of these mid-majors have started to really get cleaned out with the grad transfer stuff, so that's considering guys have even been at a university for 3 or 4 years and going to play their last year. So I think if they had the ability to do that anytime they wanted,
you would see too many student athletes jumping ship, going from school to school.
Really just bring all the all the cream to the top. But yeah, it is a little bit of a contradiction where coaches can leave whenever they want, kind of leave the players hanging out to dry, and then if they want to go elsewhere, they have to sit out a year. But hopefully, for Michigan's sake, that's not the case with Shea Patterson, and they can have them under center the way they intend to this year.
So some people embrace the ways, the style of Jim Harbaugh and how he recruits all over the world, really, and how he has done that at least in the past, and always trying to look for new ways, right, to get talent from all over the nation at least. And then some people embrace, but then also fear tanking. Let's talk about that a little bit, embracing and fearing that. And I think more and more are embracing it, guys, the idea of tanking, a concept in professional sports, I think at large now. Major League Baseball, the NHL, the NFL, maybe not as much, but the NBA, how many teams tanked this year? And the Sixers, trusting the process, look at what they've become, a 50-plus win team, tied up at 1 game apiece, right, in the first round of their series with the Heat. But still, a team that has a lot of talent, and their core is young. So how beneficial do you think this tanking is? And are you an advocate of it, Joe?
No, I'm definitely anti. I think it flies in the face of what pro sports are. I think it's really become in vogue the last handful of years, whereas in the past, it really wasn't a thing. I mean, there were teams that weren't good year to year, but that just happened because they had an injury or their talent wasn't there. I think it's even going to be going away even quicker than it got here because Adam Silver seems to be intent on removing it. I mean, the NBA, the last couple of months this year, it almost seemed as if half the NBA teams had no interest in winning. I mean,
did you see those players on the Dallas Mavericks and the Memphis Grizzlies?
The Mavericks
horrible
rosters that they were trotting out. I mean, the Grizzlies, I think, won maybe one road game in the 2018 calendar year, so that's 4 months. You're talking about Phoenix lost 17 or 18 in a row. They have a good young player in Devin Booker who just wasn't playing down the stretch, and that's not what pro sports are. I mean, there's a lot that goes into it. There's money, there's tickets, and I don't think that you can just be putting out an inferior product. And it's almost, what the Sixers did what they did, and it relies upon everybody else trying to be good. What if 20 other teams wanted to do what they did?
They're trying to do the tanking, which you see it more and more.
Then it's rampant, and it has become rampant.
It's become rampant.
The Pistons are criticized, maybe rightfully so, for being in this perpetual state of mediocrity, but it's a weird world we're living in where trying to win games and playing
is frowned upon all of a sudden.
Playing your veterans down the stretch is looked at as going about business the wrong way. And I even think sometimes, I mean, I know the 76ers won 17 in a row down the stretch with 16, one in the playoffs, but a lot of those were against tanking teams, so you have to take it with a little bit of perspective. And to be honest, that roster, it's not as if it's up and down filled with these young talented guys. They have a bunch of journeyman type guys. They have Bellinelli playing big minutes and Urian Ilyasova. And, J.J. Redick is one of their better players, and Amir Johnson has been around forever. So they do have those couple of core guys in Embiid and Simmons. But to tell you the truth, I wouldn't be surprised in the least if they lost the series to Miami. Miami has some veteran guys and Dragic who can kind of control the game, and Dwayne Wade looks like his younger self. So I'm not a fan of it. I don't think Philadelphia is going to compete for a championship this year. And I think Adam Silver is intent on shutting it down by kind of flattening those lottery odds for a lot of those non-playoff teams where it might not benefit you to be 30th out of 30. You might be the same as a team who's 17th. All 14 non-playoff teams kind of put in the same boat. And if that's the case, there's not going to be this incentive to win 12, 13 games. You'll have teams actually putting out their best 9 guys, and you can happily go to an NBA game and expect that you're going to see something.
Well, who wants to show up? That's the other aspect of things, right, which people don't take into account. I think these NBA teams don't. They're losing out on that to benefit for the future in terms of tanking to get better and good for the future, but they're losing out in the present in terms of the revenue being made probably on ticket sales, on attendance. Attendance is way down at these arenas too, where these teams are tanking, like the Mavs, like the Grizzlies. The Hawks were horrible too, another team that it looked like tanked, and they're losing on purpose. That's the problem that a lot of people have had with these teams, the Bulls even to an extent.
Yeah.
So, and there's like 7 or 8 I know that were noted that really did it this season, and that's why Adam Silver has kind of taken it upon himself as commissioner of the NBA to say enough is enough with all this tanking.
He's got to crack down on it.
Yeah.
I mean, the Kings at one point in the second half of the year said Zach Randolph's going to be playing like every other game. Which
well, you get a check, a nice hefty NBA check for playing every other day. And he's older.
He's one of their better players.
But one of their better players,
so
yeah.
It's just odd when even a guy like Mark Cuban, the guys are unafraid to come out and say that we're no longer trying to win. I just think it's horrible for the overall product. I mean,
PR-wise, too,
you can look at it in isolated situations and say, okay, maybe it worked out for the 76ers and they got these 2 really good players. Also think about the fact they probably lost a number of fans over a 3-year period, winning under 20 games each year. I mean, they went 10-72. So people are very into what's going on now and some of the recency bias, but not every basketball fan wants to watch 3 years, 82 games each year of a really less than respectable product in the hopes that you might get, which isn't even a guarantee. The NBA draft can be such a crapshoot with the guys that play such limited time in college. So they were fortunate. They wound up with a couple of guys that are really good players, but they also drafted Nerlens Noel, who's kind of nowhere in the league, and Michael Carter-Williams, who's been on every NBA team after just a few years, and Jahlil Okafor, who kind of went nowhere. So I think it's bad. I hope that the league gets away from it. I don't think that's a way to become a contender. I think there are other ways, other savvy ways that general managers can work within the framework of the rules, and I hope it goes away. Just from an overall basketball fan standpoint, I don't like it.
So if the Sixers right now are listening to you say this, they're going to want to make you eat your words eventually. Like next year, they're going to win a title, and they're going to make you eat those words, Joey, that you were just saying about them and tanking. And
yeah, I think they're kind of inexperienced, and without Joel Embiid really being there right now, and people are unsure of his status. And Ben Simmons obviously will be a star and kind of is already, but as far as winning in the playoffs against a team like Miami who's really well coached, and I just wouldn't be surprised. Now that Miami stole one in Philadelphia, I wouldn't be surprised if Miami won that series.
Tell me what you really feel about tanking. You haven't really told me anything about what you think about tanking.
Yeah,
not into it at all. How about
it's pro sports? I think every night, you expect that the team that you're going to watch is going to try and win. I don't think that's asking too much. And
well, how much do these people pay for the tickets? It's like at Little Caesars Arena if they try to do it. Now, they weren't trying to lose intentionally, but they were losing. Anyways, kind of a pitiful product, but for other reasons than these other teams that we were just talking about. And Isaiah, really quick, wanted to get your thoughts on the concept of tanking in professional sports.
Oh, I think it's just operating in bad faith, honestly, when teams do that, because you're basically telling your fans, like, hey, be patient, but still come here and spend money, and maybe in the future we'll be really good, but we're going to be bad on purpose. I mean, that doesn't make any sense. I don't even like watching the Pistons right now, where they're not trying to be bad on purpose. They're just bad. I don't even like watching that. And there is something fun about watching a team go through, like going through that phase from like the 2001 Pistons to the team that ended up winning it all. That is so much fun. Same thing with the Tigers going from, look at how they were 2005 to 2006. There's something about going on that climb from terrible to great that's really fun, but I want to see it in good faith. I don't want to see it with a team, a team doing it purposely. If I'm going to buy tickets to a game, I've put my money on the line to be able to see a game. It doesn't matter if they were good or bad. I'm not just going there just to experience the arena or the amenities. That all sounds like very Dave Brandon-esque when you start getting into that whole deal of like, well, you're coming here for more of an experience than the actual game. The game needs to be front and center. If you want to provide with other things and say like that's part of it, great. But the game has to be front and center. And I don't want to support a team, financially if they're going to flat out tell me we're not going to care this year because maybe in a couple of years we'll be good, because you could end up in a situation like, look at where the Pistons are right now. No draft picks. That's it. Like,
good luck with that roster.
Exactly.
Moving forward.
Exactly. So that's, you don't know where you're going to be on a year-to-year basis. Even last year, Pistons could have taken Donovan Mitchell. It would have been a huge help for them. They took Luke Kennard, who very well could be a very good player going forward, but Donovan Mitchell, you look at what the year that he had and how much more of a help he would have been to this particular Pistons team. So, Pistons, again, weren't actually like overtly tanking and everything, but the whole front office scouting of it all, that, you can get, have a top 2 pick and pick Darko Milicic. You could pick, what's his name, Len Bias, and something could happen to him. You never know what's going to happen just because you get that top pick.
Could be a Greg Oden situation where you pass on Kevin Durant and you get Oden instead. Anthony Bennett went number 1 to the Cavs at one point. So the Cavs had a lot of bad picks, by the way, too, and they they had to embrace the tanking or losing because of LeBron leaving. But still, it doesn't necessarily guarantee you anything. And really widespread across major league sports, professional sports like Major League Baseball, I can think of it right away, these guys that take have the ability to take somebody number 1, number 2. It doesn't guarantee anything. And in the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, it doesn't. You're right, guys. And the product on the floor and on the field really does matter. If you can't put out a respectable product, not that you have to win every single game or have 8 straight winning seasons, but if you don't put out something respectable, you're going to lose fans. They're going to, it's going to backfire on you. And they're going to, they're going to go against you. And I think, that's just how it is. And you got to deal with it. You got to deal with the repercussions, which can be significant too.
Well, it's like I think back to like 2006, 2007, 2008. I have a friend who we both went to Michigan, but he was a Michigan State fan. Both of his parents were professors at Michigan State, so he remained a Michigan State sports fan. And I remember him we were talking about Brian Hoyer, and he, it was like, oh yeah, Michigan's in a bad way in 2008, and it's like, well, at least we don't have Brian Hoyer, whatever, even though Michigan was, really terrible that year, going 3-9 themselves. But at the same time, he was like, oh, but I love the way he puts the team on his back. I love the way that he goes and he tries to make something happen. And I said, well, but it never works. And he's like, no, but he tries. I at least want to see that. I at least want to see a team that tries.
Some bite, some spirit in these players, in these teams, right?
Because it's one thing if they're going out and they're losing, and like even though we talk about these Pistons and say like, oh, but they're not, they're not trying to tank. Sometimes it does really look like a player's coming to drive the basket, and the Pistons are like, oh, right this way. I'm sorry.
Yeah, where's Drummond? Right, he goes MIA at that point. Yeah,
I didn't want to get in your way while you're going out for your highlight dunk. So. You want to see a team that's going to go out there and put it all on the line. You want to see that on a week, a daily basis, week in, week out. Because that's what they get paid for. Like Joe said, like we're not watching them because they're on the screen. We're watching them because we want to see that talent. We want to see them be able to do with it what they have. And it's kind of cheating the game if you're not going full speed, if you're not going as hard as you possibly can.
Bring your A game at all times. Keep fighting. We have to keep fighting on, and I think we'll all do that as I want to wrap up things on this week's episode of Two Bad Hombres. I'm Vito Churko signing off for this special remote episode of Two Bad Hombres. Thanks to my 2 guest co-hosts, and Isaiah Hull and Joey Yashinsky, for joining me this week. I'll talk to you guys all again for another fresh episode of Two Bad Hombres next Saturday with the Doc back as my co-host. Talk to you guys then. Bye-bye.